Howdy, folks. I'm J.L. Van Dyke with the Dallas-Fort Worth Proud Boys, and this is the West is the Best radio show. Howdy, folks. Got a lot of great segments on the show today, and what we're going to start off is the question, were the Boy Scouts of America the first Proud Boys? I myself am an Eagle Scout, and when I heard the news the Boy Scouts of America were going to begin accepting women and even allowing them to earn the rank of Eagle Scout, I was not okay with this. I don't know where they came up with this, and the whole thing came out, of all things, on I think something called Girl Power Day. I know it was also National Coming Out Day, only because I use Twitter. But I was reading this, and I was very upset about it, because men are losing their own space in society. Now, a brief history of the Boy Scouts of America. The Boy Scouts of America was started by Lord Robert Baden-Powell. He was a British soldier, and he wrote a book called Aids to Scouting. Aids to Scouting was a book about military tactics and reconnaissance. If we go to cut one, Mr. Producer, we've got a great picture of Lord Powell. And Aids to Scouting was based on military and... No, make me smaller. Yeah, there we go. Yes, that's Baden-Powell, and he's a badass. As I mentioned, in 1906, he wrote Aids to Scouting. And this book, even though it was written for the military, was very popular with younger men in his day. And so he decided to write another book around 1910, I believe, called Scouting for Boys. And it was this book that sold many, many copies. It became the very first Boy Scout handbook. And believe it or not, it was his sister. We can see a picture, Mr. Producer, I believe it's cut number 3, yes, there it is, with Lord Powell with his sister Agnes Powell, who founded the Girl Guides, which later became the Girl Scouts of America. So, at the founding of the Boy Scouts of America, and for that matter, the Girl Scouts, the organizations were always intended to remain separate. But, of course, now we live in an era where people don't believe that there's any difference between the genders anymore. People don't understand there's differences in physical strength. There's differences that really go both physical and mental between men and women. And so now we've got women being accepted in the Boy Scouts. Well, what was interesting about the Boy Scouts is the Boy Scouts was actually formed at the turn of the 20th century to promote a lot of the same kind of things that the Proud Boys were designed to were founded to promote. Let's go back to cut number 2, Mr. Producer. The Boy Scouts, first and foremost, were designed to promote masculinity. It was also formed to promote good citizenship, what we might call civic nationalism today. And this was during a time prior to the First World War where masculinity in America was really on a decline. And it's from there where we get the third part of the Scout Oath. Cut 4, Mr. Producer. We've got the entirety of the Scout Oath and Law on screen for you. Go ahead and make that big, make me small, so that all the viewers can read it. And the third part of the Scout Oath, which is by far the most controversial, is to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. And the Boy Scouts did some of the same things that the Proud Boys have done. Believe it or not, in 1913, Woodrow Wilson was elected president. He was a Democrat. I believe we've got a picture of Mr. Wilson, or President Wilson. Yes, thank you, Mr. Producer. Boy Scouts actually served as crowd control during the inauguration of President Woodrow Wilson in 1913. And it would be shortly thereafter that the Boy Scouts would receive their congressional charter, which said, "The purpose of this corporation shall be to promote through organization and cooperation with other agencies, the ability of boys to do things for themselves and others, to train in scoutcraft, and to teach them patriotism, courage, self-reliance, and kindred virtues using the methods which are now in common use by Boy Scouts. Now, it bears mentioning that Lord Powell did not really intend to found the Boy Scouts. It was founded very much by accident. But this book that he wrote, Scouting for Boys, proved so popular that he was inundated with requests to form scout troops, and before he knew it, Scouting had membership which peaked worldwide. It was in every major country. There was a scouting organization. Obviously, the United States and the United Kingdom have been among the biggest scouting organizations in the world, and things have changed over time with the Scouts. It bears mentioning that in the 1970s, Scouting was on a major decline because they did away with some of the merit badges that were required to earn the Eagle Scout rank. You didn't have to get a merit badge in camping anymore to become an Eagle Scout, or swimming, or some other things that men, in my opinion, are just expected to know how to do. And that led to a serious decline in the membership of Scouting. So in the early 80s, I guess they fired these people because that seems to be the only way you could save an organization like the Boy Scouts. They brought Scouting back to its roots. It became popular again, and now it seems like things have become full circle. The Boy Scouts of America, which is based, by the way, in Irving, Texas. I went to college in Irving, Texas, at University of Dallas. I've been to the Scouting Museum. I've been to the world headquarters. It boggles the mind that it has been such a short period of time since the 1970s, and it would seem that the Boy Scouts are making the same mistakes over and over again. There's certainly some people that would say this mistake started by admitting scouts who were homosexual or allowing scout leaders who were homosexual. You know, I didn't have a big problem with that. One of the first people I ever worked for as an attorney, he was a gay man. He was a very good father to his 3 children, which he had through a surrogate mother. I really don't think someone like that should be banned from becoming a scoutmaster. And in fact, when I heard that a Cub Scout troop was giving him a hard time about that, I wrote and I expressed my outrage as an Eagle Scout to the world headquarters of Scouting. And I'm not saying that it was because of my letter. I'm sure they got a number of other very well-written letters about that, but they eased their restrictions on allowing homosexuals to become scouts and to become troop leaders, and that's fine and that's good and how I think it should be. But this is the Boy Scouts. It was always intended to be separate from the Girl Scouts. There are only 2 genders. There are differences between men and women, and those differences should be respected. Men should have their own space, like they have in the Proud Boys, and like up until recently they had in the Boy Scouts of America. And here's what can happen when men don't have their own space. You get people like Harvey Weinstein, a contemptible individual that my producer told me before the show has actually now, even though I think did he win an Academy Award, Mr. Producer?
That's what it said. He won an Academy Award, or he's stripped of his Academy.
Well, he's won one, and now he's been stripped of his membership in the Academy.
That's right. He's going to get blackballed pretty hard.
Well, and it's really about time.
Well deserved.
Go ahead and make me big again. And I have a theory about Harvey Weinstein. For some people who are in the Proud Boys, you might not be old enough to remember some of the really good movies we had in the 80s, but there were 2 younger actors in the 80s that were referred to as the 2 Coreys. I remember one of them. There they are, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. A lot of people remember Corey Feldman most from his role in The Goonies. I forgot what the name of his character was. Do you remember, Mr. Producer?
I do not.
Okay. And then Corey Haim, they were together in movies like The Lost Boys. That is a classic vampire movie. Do we have a picture from The Lost Boys? I think we do. Yes, The Lost Boys. This was really before when men still acted like men, and before vampires became all faggy and weird like we have in the Twilight. We had movies like The Lost Boys. It's a classic 80s movie, and it featured the 2 Coreys, Haim and Feldman. Well, as what happens with a lot of childhood actors, both of them apparently got into drugs pretty hard. One of them, Feldman, got clean, and the other one, Corey Haim, did not. Corey Haim actually died very young some years ago, I think in 2010, officially of pneumonia, but drugs certainly contributed to it. He was seeing all sorts of different pill mills to get prescription drug. He'd struggled with drug addiction his entire life. And it's really a shame because one of the things that Corey Feldman has mentioned on talk shows is how both he and Corey Haim were sexually abused as childhood actors in Hollywood. And when I heard this Harvey Weinstein story, something really stuck with me because I remembered, again, I was a fan of these movies. And so I watched the interview in preparation for the show, and he stated that pedophilia in Hollywood is relatively common, and one of the persons that abused both him and Corey Haim happened to be a Hollywood mogul. And Corey Feldman, obviously Corey Haim can't talk about it anymore, but Corey Feldman has been silent as the identity of his abuser ever since. I really would think that he would want to get justice for himself and his friend. And when this story broke, I got to thinking, who is powerful enough for this person who's obviously had this sex abuse affect him his whole life to be silent so as to prevent this man from being thrown into prison where he belongs? And I was thinking one of the only people I can think of in Hollywood that has this kind of power is Harvey Weinstein. Again, I'm not saying that he did it. I've got absolutely no evidence that he did it, but it wouldn't surprise me. As a criminal defense attorney, we learn that with respect to sexual assailants, rapists, they don't do it because it feels good. Rape is not about sexual pleasure. Rape is a violent crime of power and control over another person. So if and only if Harvey Weinstein was the person that abused the two Coreys, it probably wasn't necessarily because he wanted sexual pleasure from it, as to demonstrate his power and control. Because as we've all learned, this is a very, very sick individual who needs to be prosecuted and he needs to be punished. Speaking of prosecuting and punishing people, we're talking about bump stocks. This has been dominating the mentally ill news for some time now. People are, we need to ban bump stocks. Gavin McInnes, peace be upon him, had John Lott and another individual on his show talking about why we needed to ban bump stocks. I don't remember the name of the other producer, the other person on Gavin's show. Let's see if we can find his name, Mr. Producer. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but his argument for banning bump stocks was that this man could have had access to fully automatic weapons. They are available, as they astutely pointed out, as long as they were made prior to 1986. You have to do some paperwork for them. We're actually going to be discussing some of that paperwork later on in the show. But he could have had access to them, but the bump stock was the next best thing. And he wanted to ban bump stocks immediately so as to deter people who would see this as the next best thing. Well, what I wanted to scream into my car radio as I was hearing this interview, and I don't know why Dr. Lott failed to ask this question, was, well, if you ban bump stocks, what's going to be the next best thing after that? It's just going to be regular semi-automatic rifles that are in common use throughout the country. That'll be the next best thing, and it's going to be a never-ending cycle if you keep banning the best thing available for crazy, sick individuals to carry out massacres. Eventually you're going to have nothing left, and that's what I thought was the real flaw in the gentleman's argument. So we're going to talk a little bit about bump stocks today and why we should not have a law banning them. First of all, the definition of semi-automatic and fully automatic. The definition, what we're showing up there on the screen is a difference between a semi and a fully automatic bolt carrier for an AR-15. Go ahead and make that small, Mr. Producer. I'm not quite ready for that yet. The definition of a semi-automatic is a firearm that fires one and only one round for every movement of the trigger. Now, the word movement, not pull of the trigger, is actually very important. That's a legal term, and that is something we're going to be talking about later when I talk about some alternatives to bump stocks that are currently available on the market. But fully automatic permits a gun to fire more than one round for every movement of the trigger. And so we have the AR-15 versus the M16. Mr. Producer, give me the painted AR-15, if you would, that's on the ground there. Thank you. This is my AR-15 right here, and a lot of you are probably looking at my AR-15 saying, "Man, is that an ugly gun? Who painted that?" Actually, I painted that. I've actually been giving some classes to one of my friends on how to paint their guns. This isn't supposed to look pretty. This is a working gun. And the camouflage design is not supposed to be pretty or perfect because the purpose of the camouflage is to break up the outline of the weapon. But this weapon will fire once and only once every time I pull the trigger. An M16, if I were to take this trigger right here, I'm not going to put my finger on this trigger, and I were to hold it back, it would continue to fire. The bump stock, this weapon, by the way, does not have a bump stock. This is a telescoping stock. This is made by Magpul right here in the United States, and it allows me simply to adjust the length of the stock. This, incidentally, would make this particular weapon a lot more useful for someone who's smaller than me. I'm a big guy. I'm 6'1". I weigh about 240. Yes, I know I'm fat. I'm trying to lose weight, but that's what this feature's for. It's not designed to make this hard to hide in my coat, even though this is a legally registered short barrel rifle. The barrel on this weapon is 10.5 inches long. That silencer that you see on the end of the barrel is real. We'll be going over that a little bit later in the show. But a bump stock would allow this whole weapon to move back and forth as the weapon fires. Normally, what makes the weapon work, you can't see it here, there's a tube that connects to some holes in the barrels right around there, and it goes back into the bolt carrier. I'm going to try to pull this apart so we can see it. Just clean this thing. This is the bolt carrier group of my AR-15, and there's a little hole right there which connects to the gas tube. The gas is actually going to push this back into the stock. There's a spring in the stock which is going to let it slide back forward to permit this weapon to function. It is the gas system which dictates the rate of fire of this weapon. It is not the bump stock. I can pull the trigger on this weapon relatively fast. There are some freaks of nature out there like Jerry Miculek. He's a world shooting champion. You can find pictures of Jerry Miculek. It's spelled Miculek. And even Bob Munden, before he died, he held all sorts of world records for fast draw. And it's amazing how fast they can pull the triggers on their weapons. I'm nowhere near that fast. I don't know a lot of people who are. But the bump stock does not affect the gas system of this weapon. It manipulates how fast I am physically capable of pulling the trigger on this weapon. Yes, that's Jerry Miculek right there. I think that's off center, Mr. Producer. Go ahead and make that small and make me big again. Yeah, you can look him up on the internet. That guy is a great shooter, but you don't need a bump stock to shoot fast, and I don't want you to buy a bump stock. I'm someone that's got a lot of experience shooting. I'm nowhere near as good as Jerry, but I don't want you to buy a bump stock because it causes you to lose your accuracy of your weapon. This weapon right here is designed in semi-automatic mode to be able to engage multiple threats very, very quickly. And I can show you how to go fast without using a bump stock, but because of the camera angles here, I'm not going to do it on this rifle. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it on my handy-dandy Glock 19, which is one of the weapons we had on the last show. Here's how you perform this test at your home. First, you're going to verify visually and physically that you have an unloaded weapon. Obviously, the magazine is not in this weapon. I have verified physically and visually that there is not a round in the chamber. And I'm going to put the slide is going to go forward. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull the trigger. Y'all heard it click. But you notice how my finger is still on the trigger and holding it back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the slide, pull it all the way back, and I'll let it go forward. And I'm slowly Going to release the trigger until I hear it click. And I'll feel it in my finger too. It's tactile. That is as far out as I need to let this trigger. This is called your trigger reset before I can fire another round. So now I can fire another round. That's going to mimic the action the slide's going to do when I fire a projectile from this weapon, and I go again. And you can see how fast I can do that. The same exact principle applies with this rifle, and this rifle actually it has an extremely light trigger on it. This is how you charge it. I forgot to check it. That's very important. Okay, I've visually and physically inspected this weapon, and I can do the same with this rifle. I'm gonna let the bolt go forward. I'm gonna pull the trigger. Now holding it back as I cock it, and it's almost nothing. I can fire 2 or 3 rounds from this rifle extremely quickly using my trigger reset. That is how we fire fast at multiple targets at close range. Not using this bump stock. This bump stock completely compromises your stance. It gives you shitty accuracy, and there's no real purpose for it other than firing a whole lot of rounds into a very big target like a large crowd. But I don't want it to be banned. And here's why. Let me put this rifle down here off my table here. As stupid as these bump fire stocks are, I don't think they should be banned, and here's why. And it's because I read the bill that was written by a congressman. I think he's a Republican, actually, and I want you all to oppose it. It is defined as anything that increases the rate of fire of a semi-automatic handgun. Well, I'm going to show you something. Mr. Producer, bring up the picture of the bolts from the AR-15 and the M16, please. One of the differences between these guns is the bolt carrier groups. It's actually legal to have a full auto bolt carrier group in your gun because it's got more mass, and just the bolt carrier alone will not cause your weapon to function as a fully automatic. But there's different bolt carrier groups. But the biggest difference, Mr. Producer, go to this. I'm going to show you all how to identify a fully automatic AR-15 to an M16. Is the presence of the auto sear. Go to the picture of the auto sear. That's an auto sear. That is a part that you would install in your M16 or other legally registered machine gun, which would allow it to fire fully automatic. Next photograph, Mr. Producer. And you can see, everyone look at that picture, and you see that above the word semi on that lower receiver, there's a little pin. I'm not going to tell you how big it is. I don't want people trying to make one of these at home. But that's where the auto sear goes in. If my weapon wasn't painted, actually, Mr. Producer, bring me the AR-15 that's set up as a precision rifle. What we're going to do is I'm going to no, the AR. I'm not sure how well you can see it here, but you will notice that this particular rifle does not have that particular hole in the trigger group, and the reason is because this is a semi-automatic AR-15. It's simply set up as a precision rifle, and if it did have that hole, regardless of whether it had an auto sear installed, it would be considered a machine gun, because the ATF defines a machine gun not only as one capable of firing more than one round for movement of the trigger. No, go back. Go back to the last one, please. No, one before that. But it also defines a machine gun as anything that is can be readily converted into a machine gun. That's why we don't have certain semi-automatics that fire from the open bolt. And so if it's got that little hole above where it says semi, that hole's been drilled to install an auto sear, and that's how you know you're holding something that is a machine gun rather than a semi-automatic AR-15. Now you can also tell by opening up the weapon. Mr. Producer, go to the next slide, please. Now you can see the auto sear at the very top in there. It's that thing with the little coil spring going horizontally. That's where the auto sear, that's where the auto sear goes in the weapon. And what it's designed to do is allow this weapon to fire at its cyclic rate. And now let's go to the final slide, which shows the receiver. You can also see the weapon with the auto sear installed. You see how much space it has behind the auto sear? That's designed to give the auto sear room to move. On a semi-automatic AR-15, they've actually put extra metal in there, as you can see from this photograph, to prevent people from easily modifying an AR-15 lower receiver to make it into a machine gun simply by drilling a hole with a drill press, which up until that time could have been done. And frankly, the shooter in Las Vegas, he had a pilot's license. He was clearly technically inclined. If he had the schematics, he probably could have gotten this done. So I asked the question, which weapon has the higher rate of fire? The semi-automatic AR-15 or the fully automatic M16? And the answer is the rate of fire is exactly the same. If I were to do something which is a felony and drill that little hole in the receiver, mill out with a machine shop, I wouldn't know the first thing how to do it. I'm an attorney. I don't know how to use a machine shop, but mill out that section so that the auto sear can be installed. An AR-15 that has been illegally converted to an M16 would fire at exactly the same rate as a weapon that has been built as an M16. So the rate of fire is the same. It's a function of physics, how fast the gas system can manually work that bolt back and forth so the gun can fire at its cyclic rate. A semi-automatic will fire as fast as you can pull the trigger, and there may be products like a bump stock that will allow you to manually pull the trigger a lot faster. So when we've got this bill that talks about defining a banned feature on a semi-automatic as anything that can increase the rate of fire of a semi-automatic rifle, it can mean all sorts of different things. What are they going to do? Jerry Mitchell can fire a semi-automatic rifle faster than just about anybody that I know of. Is he going to have to register his finger as a machine gun? Are they going to cut off his finger or not let him shoot anymore if they do that? Who defines what rate of fire is? Certainly, hopefully not the ATF, because practically anything can increase the rate of fire as people are misquoting it. I've just explained that the rate of fire on this AR-15 and M16 is actually exactly the same. I just can't physically pull the trigger that fast. But now we would have, with this new law, the ATF deciding what increases the rate of fire on a weapon. Next slide, Mr. Producer. This here, remember I mentioned earlier that a semi-automatic is not defined as every pull of the trigger, but for every movement of the trigger. This is a device. It's not a bump fire stock. It's manufactured by, I think, Franklin Armory, if memory serves me correctly. It is called a binary trigger system. Again, not a bump stock. What this will allow your weapon to do, it fires one round on binary mode every time you pull the trigger, and another time every time you release the trigger. So you can imagine how quickly something like this could increase your rate of fire. And the reason this is legal, it's been approved by the ATF, is because it's firing one round for every movement of the trigger. One time when you pull the trigger, one time when you release the trigger. So would that then classify as a machine gun? I suppose it would. I don't have a binary trigger in any of my firearms, and the reason is because I prefer to maintain full control over my weapon. I can fire 2 shots using the trigger reset technique I demonstrated on this show very, very quickly. I don't need a binary trigger. The money I would spend on a binary trigger, I would rather spend training to learn how to use the weapon properly, and I'm very confident in my own ability to use an AR-15 for multiple target engagements. Next slide, Mr. Producer. This is a very popular trigger setup for competition shooters. This is the Hyperfire 24C trigger. For those of you who are familiar with the AR-15 platform, you'll notice it looks a lot different from your standard AR-15 trigger. This is a straight semi-automatic trigger. However, it creates a trigger pull that is light and short enough that it would allow a competition shooter for things like multi-gun competition to fire that AR-15 extremely fast. So is the ATF going to ban this? In fact, I could take this Glock. This is something I do for my friends. There's parts that I can purchase online to greatly lighten the trigger on the Glock, which in effect make it so I can physically fire the weapon faster with the same accuracy. What this bill is going to do is it's going to ban trigger jobs commonly used by hunters and by competition shooters, and essentially, as written, it will require everyone to essentially stick with the trigger they're given with the manufacturer. And that's terrible. It's going to cost us jobs. Gunsmiths aren't going to be able to perform custom work on their weapons anymore, and it's going to be an all-out nightmare because they don't understand that the rate of fire is the same, and this bump stock law is a bad law. Maybe if they could rewrite the bill and make it better, okay, they could do it. I don't care about bump stocks, but I don't want a law getting rid of them, particularly one that's been written by a Republican representative who doesn't know jack shit about firearms. And again, who would define this? The ATF? Let's look at some of what the ATF has defined as a machine gun in the past. Next slide, Mr. Producer. This is a shoelace that was attached to, I believe, can't tell if that's an M1, I believe it's an M14, because I think I see a magazine release on it. This is a shoelace rigged in a manner, and the ATF designated this shoelace to be a machine gun because it was a part that was able to convert a semi-automatic rifle to fire as a fully automatic rifle. I'm not lying about this. Go ahead and Google shoelace machine gun, and you will find the letter that the ATF wrote in 2004 designating this to be a machine gun. Next slide, Mr. Producer. This is just silly. This is a rubber band. You could set up a rubber band in such a manner. The way this works is as you pull the trigger, it puts more force on the return cycle of the trigger to allow you to make the gun fire at its cyclic rate. This rubber band could be one of those devices. This is completely stupid, and memory serves me right, the ATF stated that a rubber band used in this configuration was a machine gun. So we don't need laws, we don't need regulations regulating bump stocks, but I don't think you should buy them. Just like I don't think people should buy, I've got an article coming out for West of the Best, I don't think people should buy these AR and AK pistols because people spend so much time creating items like the binary trigger system and the bump stock and these AR pistols, and they don't think about whether they really should have created them. I don't think they should be outlawed, but for some of you who are involved in the gun community, you will remember that this company, I think it was Century Arms, created a pistol version of the AK-74 rifle, which fires the 5.45 millimeter rifle cartridge. And what it did is, because it was the first pistol in this, it resulted in an import ban on surplus 5.45 ammunition because it then became classified as armor-piercing pistol ammunition based on the law. Had they not made this ridiculous AK Draco pistol that I don't think anyone who really knows what they're doing would buy, we would still be able to get this surplus 5.45 ammunition. But nope, they made a pistol out of it, so now we can't get the surplus ammunition, and we all pay more for 5.45. And in fact, that's why I don't own a 4.45 millimeter firearm, because the surplus ammo is dried up, you can't get any more, there's no point in having one. But another thing we've been talking about is silencers. So while we're here, we're going to talk about what a silencer really does. And as you can see, I've got quite a few here. There are 4 things that make noise when your gun goes off. The first thing is the primer, which is actually a very small explosive charge, which ignites the powder and thus causes a great deal of gas in a very small space. It's that gas which propels the bullet, which is the part of the cartridge that pokes holes into people, out of the barrel at a very high rate of speed. The second thing which makes noise is all of the gas created by that expanding powder exiting this small confined space of this barrel at a very high rate of speed. That makes noise. I was working with my dog earlier today. We're training my dog Winston to be a gun dog, and they've got this little air cannon. It doesn't actually shoot anything, it just mimics the sound of a gunshot. It makes noise so that to teach the dogs not to be gun shy. That's how it works, by causing a lot of air to exit a confined space in a short period of time. The third thing that makes noise is the noise of the bullet breaking the sound barrier, provided, of course, you're shooting a weapon that fires rounds that break the sound barrier, which is most of them. I'm aware that the 45 ACP pistol round does not typically break the sound barrier, but any rifle round that's not designed specifically to be subsonic will break the sound barrier. So get that sonic boom crack. It sounds kind of like the crack of a whip. And in fact, a whip crack is the tip of the whip, the tip of the whip breaking the sound barrier. Can't talk today. I might need more coffee. And then with a semi-automatic rifle, which is what this AR-15 is, it's the sound of the semi-automatic rifle working to eject the spent shell casing and chamber a new round. You can reduce the noise created by one and only one of these things, and that is by somehow slowing down all of the gas that is exiting that muzzle at a high rate of speed. This here is a silencer. Next slide, Mr. Producer. Thank you. This is your car's muffler works in exactly the same way as a silencer. These silencers that I have on these weapons cannot be broken down and opened up by the end user. That's a cutaway of a car muffler, and I chose that because the silencer on the end of this AR-15 works in exactly the same way as your car muffler. It muffles the sound of the gunshot. Now, there's a number of things you should consider when you're buying a silencer for anything you can, any one of your weapons. We're gonna, as I am an attorney, we're going to talk about how you can do that. But there's rimfire silencers, which I didn't bring one today because it's being cleaned right now. Rimfire silencers are made for your .22 long rifle, but you should really check if you're looking at a rimfire suppressor to see if it's rated for rounds like .22 Magnum and 17 HMR. I happen to have two Silencer Co. Spectre 2 cans. That's another thing we call silencers. We call them cans because that's kind of what they are. And those are rated for 17 HMR, for .22 Magnum. I can even put one on my FN PS90, which is in the FN 5.7 round, and it'll work. So check for that. You can probably get a silencer before tax. You can get it for about $300 to $400 for a rimfire silencer. Those are very popular because realistically, that's going to be as quiet as they get is when you're firing a .22 rimfire. On a pistol, obviously you're going to need a threaded barrel, just like on anything. Just about to get your silencer to work. It's going to have what's called a Nielsen device on it, which allows the pistol to function, because when you fire your semi-automatic pistol, we can see it on this Glock. See how this barrel's actually loose, so I can move it around? This barrel moves ever so slightly, and the Nielsen device allows the silencer to work on this pistol without jamming the pistol. I've got several pistol silencers. Really, my purpose for having them is, one, I've got some pistol caliber carbines like a Chris Vector and a CZ Scorpion, but they're a heck of a lot of fun to shoot at the range. Silencer Co., Dead Air, AAC, and a Gemtech all make really good ones. But on your rifle, a rifle is where, in my opinion, having a silencer really shines. This here on my precision rifle 223 is a Gemtech. This was actually a very inexpensive silencer. I got this on sale. GT Distributors was having a run of them. It's an older model made by Gemtech. It's called the Trek. And I think I bought this for like $350, which is a steal for a silencer in 5.56 millimeter. And it threads directly onto the barrel, as we can see here. And for a rifle, for a precision rifle, that's what you want. I'm going to grab my smaller AR-15 again. This also has a silencer. This is the Silencer Co. Saker. And because I might not always want this silencer on here, I can take this off. This ratchets on and off. So I push down, give it a turn, comes off just that easy. And now without the silencer, I have a rifle that I can use much more easily in a very confined space but this weapon is going to be extremely loud because of how short the barrel is without the silencer. So to put this silencer back on, I'm going to line it up, and then I just screw it on as hard as I can. That's all it takes to attach and detach the Saker silencer from this weapon. One thing I forgot to show is the muzzle brake is specifically designed for this silencer, so that is a consideration. Mr. Producer, I want you to take my AR back and bring me my Remington. Yes. This here is probably one of my favorite rifles. This is a custom-built Remington 700 rifle, and this actually has a very innovative silencer on it, and I like to show off this particular silencer. You're going to see it looks like a direct thread, and it is a direct thread, but then again it isn't. This here is a Templar Tactical Nemesis. Is it the Nemesis? Yes, the Nemesis 30 silencer. They're now called Crow, but they spell it C-R-U-X for whatever reason. They're out of Conroe, Texas. This is an incredible silencer. This weighs almost nothing. The whole thing is made of titanium, and what's really innovative about this design, as well as I think a company called Thunderbeast has this is a muzzle brake right here, so that I could put on the end of just about any rifle that meets the specifications for this silencer, but there's threading right here, so I can directly thread this silencer onto the rifle. And that's very important for a precision rifle. This particular 308, it does have a 20-inch barrel, but it's been designed with a custom chamber, so I can actually shoot, and I have shot 308 rounds out to 1,600 yards with this particular rifle. That's a very long way for a 308. It probably wouldn't do a whole lot at 1,600 yards. The maximum effective range of this rifle is 800 meters, which is about 880 yards. This gun will shoot 1,000 yards all day long. Provided you have good dope, good wind call, it's not a problem. This takes a heavier 175 grain bullet, 308, and with this little tiny silencer on the end, and it's not cheap, this sounds, I would say, slightly louder than a 22. Still definitely enough to get someone's attention. For anyone who's fired an unsuppressed 22, you'll know. It sounds like a gunshot. So if you're near this rifle, you're going to hear it. It does not make this rifle completely silent, even though there's no action to move back and forth on this bolt gun. It still makes noise. It's not going to sound like a James Bond movie, but it does lower the sound made by the weapon significantly and makes it safe for me to fire this rifle every so often without hearing protection. On the range, if I'm firing this rifle continually, I'm going to want to wear hearing protection. Let's get this off the table, Mr. Producer, because we're still talking about something that's registering at in the mid to high 130s on the decibel scale, and it can cause damage to your hearing. There's no safe exposure to the human ear over 140 decibels. But in the 130s, you fire it once or twice without hearing protection with a silencer, it's not going to damage your hearing. And my primary purpose for that is hunting. I don't like wearing ear protection when I'm hunting. I want to hear what's around me. It might be a deer, it might be another hunter. That's for my safety and for the safety of other hunters, especially when I'm on public land. So that's what a silencer looks like. I recommend, if you're using a precision rifle, to use a direct thread or a design like the Templar Tactical, where it's a brake that you thread the suppressor on over the brake. But the question everyone's going to ask is, how do I legally acquire one of these silencers? Assistant producer, can you bring me that book? We have an assistant producer in the studio here. Come here. Come here on camera. What's your name?
My name is Blake Brian Calhoun.
Okay, well, thank you. You're doing a good job as an assistant producer, okay? Go ahead and sit over there.
Yes, sir.
The way you acquire a silencer is, first of all, the same rules apply to acquiring a silencer as apply to acquiring a handgun. You have to be 21 years of age. You have to meet the same requirements as far as your criminal history is concerned. And there's a number of steps. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to go to a store. If you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, I really like a store called Rifle Gear. I know this is being broadcast nationally, so another really good store. It's a Texas-based store. It's very popular to purchase silencers. It's called Silencer Shop. You can find Silencer Shop online, but if you're local, please buy from Rifle Gear or from Lone Star Armory. They also have a very good selection of silencers, either of them. And you're going to go purchase the device, and you're going to pay for it. You're not going to walk out of the store with it. What's going to happen is you're going to have to fill out something called a Form 4. This is the Form 4 for one of the silencers that you saw on the show today, where you're going to have to fill out some information. On this line, it's going to have who you are, who's selling it to you. It's going to have the make, the model, the serial number, all the information associated with the silencer. The dealer's going to sign it. You're going to sign it. You're going to have to fill out some information on the back here. Now what you're going to have to do is attach, and you're going to have to fill this out in duplicate and send it to the ATF with a $200 sin tax. Not SYNTAX, but SINTAX, because the government in its infinite wisdom has decided that owning a silencer is a sin. So it's $200 tax. You're going to have to send a copy of this form to your police department. You don't have to get their permission. That was the old law. Now you just notify them. It used to be you have to ask Mother May I, and that's why lawyers like me created gun trusts to get around having to ask Mother May I from your local chief law enforcement officer. Don't have to do that anymore. All you have to do is notify them. You're going to have to get passport photos taken. It's going to go on a spot on the new Form 4. You're going to have to submit 2 sets of fingerprint cards to the FBI. You can still use a gun trust. I still write gun trusts for people. It's no longer a de facto requirement, but that it'll take almost a year for you to get for the paperwork to come back with this nifty little stamp right here, which shows that the tax has in fact been paid, and the signature down here, which shows that the transfer has in fact been approved. And once you do that, you actually fill out the same 4473 form that you would for any other type of firearm purchase, and then you walk out with your silencer. So it is a major hassle to purchase a silencer right now for something that makes a regular gun as loud as an unsuppressed .22, which is still plenty loud. There will still damage your hearing. I think it's ridiculous, and that's why I would certainly urge everyone to write their representatives and their senators not only to oppose this bump stock ban, which I've been spending the better part of the show explaining why it's ridiculous, but also to support the Hearing Protection Act and basically making it as easy to buy a silencer as it would to buy any other firearm. I think that's a good thing. I think it'll improve safety, and I think it will benefit the shooting community in the long run without jeopardizing public safety. These people that say it's going to jeopardize public safety obviously have not fired one of these rifles either indoors or outdoors using a silencer before. They don't know what they're talking about. So, to wrap up today's show, what we're going to do is I listen to Gavin's show, Get Off My Lawn, every morning on the way to work. It usually gets posted around 7 o'clock at night, so now I listen to it the following morning on my way into work. And one of the segments that was on this week were words that he didn't want you to use anymore. And I particularly enjoyed that segment because being the firearms instructor for a bunch of millennials at the University of North Texas, I've heard a number of these words too, but there were some that Gavin, they must have just slipped his mind, so I'm going to start off with 5 phrases I don't want anyone to use anymore. And the first one that is an offender of this is cray-cray. Congratulations, numbnuts. What you've done is you've taken the word crazy, one word, you've separated it into 2 words, and now you're stating it in a manner that makes you sound like a full-fledged retard. Something is not cray-cray, it's just crazy. Say crazy, and don't say cray-cray. Next phrase that I don't want to hear from anymore is when someone says, just saying. This is particularly annoying because what happened was it used to say, what I used to hear instead of just saying was, "No offense, but," and I'd hear them say "no offense, but," and it would inevitably be followed by an opinion that I really didn't want to hear. "No offense, but" is always followed by an opinion that will inevitably offend you. But now they don't give you the courtesy. I used to see "no offense, but" and just stop reading or stop listening because I really didn't care what the person had to say. But now they just state their bullshit opinion, and they say, "just saying" at the end of it, as though it makes their opinion any more legitimate. Stop it. Don't say, if you write a post on the internet or social media, and you feel the need to say "just saying" at the end of it, just delete the post because no one cares, no one wants to read what you have to say. Number 3 are the phrases that piss me off. Long story short. Whenever I hear the words "long story short," I know it's time for me to grab a beer and get comfortable because I will inevitably be hearing an extremely long story that will not be short. I don't have time for this type of shit, and I'm guilty of saying this myself, and so now I have to discipline myself to say, the story behind what I'm about to tell you doesn't matter. Here's the point. Because I don't want to tell the story, the other person doesn't want to listen to the story, and they really shouldn't have to. So please stop saying "long story short," just get to the point. Cut to the last minute of the story. That's what matters. Next, and this is inevitably a hand sign, you'll get some bimbo that does, "I can't even." Stop it. You can't even what, you stupid bitch? I don't speak Section 8. Don't say "if you can't even" unless you follow it up by telling me you can't even what. If you can't even, then why the hell are you still here? Go do something useful like make me a sandwich. Can you do that? And then number 5 of the phrases that I can't stand are, "it is what it is." I'm guilty myself of saying this one, and it's usually when I'm about to give a really shitty plea offer to a client from a prosecutor, and the client's guilty as sin, and I'll say, "it is what it is." Oh, well, no shit, it is what it is. It is what it is, as opposed to what? What it isn't? Of course it is what it is. Stop saying this. And I'm going to start punishing myself, I don't know, maybe by doing some push-ups or something every time I say this. So from the phrases, that gets us into the 5 words that piss me off. The first one is bay, not B-A-Y, like a bay window, but bay. B-A-E. Bravo. Alpha. Echo. I actually had to ask my millennial students what the hell this word meant because I tried looking up in the dictionary and I couldn't find it. And apparently it stands for before anyone else. So that's your boyfriend or your girlfriend. Fine. Tell me it's your boyfriend or your girlfriend. Don't say it's your bae. That doesn't make any sense, and it makes you sound like a retard. Next one. Totes. Totes you can actually find in the dictionary, and I thought that I knew what a tote was, and I thought it was one of those bags that I used to carry shit around in, except for a man, it's a briefcase or a leather satchel. Men don't carry a tote bag. We carry a briefcase or a satchel with our important papers and the shit we need for work in them. But now this word is short for totally. Millennials can't even be bothered to say the word tote anymore. Say something like, totes. It sounds pompous and faggy, and I don't want to hear it anymore. This word is definitely number 3 is annoying, is whatever. That's a complete sentence now, whatever, and it's usually spoken by teenage girls with an eye roll. Whatever. Probably to their parents, and what it has become to mean is either you don't agree with what I'm saying or you don't care what I have to say. So instead of telling me whatever, if you don't agree with me, tell me why you don't agree with me. And if you don't want to hear what I'm saying, tell me to shut the fuck up. Don't say whatever. Then I don't even want to tell you what I was going to say anymore because I know I'm telling it to someone who's stupid and probably isn't even going to understand it. Yes, number 4, legit. The word legit has become a favorite phrase of the dopey college frat boy. Legit is short for legitimate, which has an adjective meaning conforming to the law or the rules. This adjective, which has now been bastardized by the millennials, is now used as an expression of approval, such as, if you've been watching this show, you might say, "Dude, did you see Van Dyke's rifles? Those are legit." Is that you? If it is, fix yourself. Finally, the number 5 on the words that piss me off, the worst word, the most annoying of all words, and the word that in his 3-part series that Gavin McInnes, peace be upon him, failed to remember, the word very. Never, ever use the word very. Why? Because it's lazy. A man is not very tired, he is exhausted. I don't get very angry at liberals, I get enraged. I'm not very sad when I run out of beer, I'm crestfallen. Language was invented for one reason, fellow Proud Boys, and that reason is to woo women. And in that endeavor, laziness will not do. But if you take one thing away from the show, I'll close on this note. No matter what anyone tells you, words and ideas can change the world. I'm Jason Van Dyke. Thank you for watching, and good night.